I'll now introduce our third speaker, Dr. Nadine Boljkovac, who earned her PhD at the University of Cambridge. Following postdoctoral fellowships, from 2016, she was senior lecturer in film at Falmouth University. Following her senior lectureship, she was a visiting fellow at the Center for Transformative Media at the Parsons New School for Design before moving to the University of Cologne in 2019, where she's been a Morfata Center Research Fellow and then a guest lecturer in American Literary and Culture Studies and Romance Studies. Her book on Alain Resnais and Chris Marker, Untimely Effects, Gilles Deleuze and an Ethics of Cinema, was reissued in paperback in 2015. Her book in process is titled Beyond Herself, Feminist Portraiture and the Moving Image, and it examines feminist moving image portrait work. Her paper today is titled She Listened, Vardian Self-Portraiture and Auto-Refrains of Sea, Wind, and Sand.
Thanks, Rebecca. Can you see my screen all right? You probably muted yourself.
It looks wonderful.
Okay. Okay, thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be part of our panel, Future Varda, and to be here with all of you and with my co-panelists, with Emma, who was my PhD supervisor, with Sandy, whose work I first read during my undergrad, and my mentor from those days is in our audience. It means a lot to me, and with Rebecca, who excellently organized our panel, as you can see, and co-edited, as she mentioned, the Future Varda Camera Obscura issue of this May. This presentation proposes a theory of eco-feminist moving image self-portraiture that's informed by questions of perception and subjectification. For to celebrate Varda is to simultaneously celebrate the worlds of human and non-human encounters that she forged. And I'll begin. From a beloved button to a bottomless sea, Agnès Varda celebrated material and ephemeral worlds. She embraced life in its myriad forms and many scales, from the minute to majestic. She herself was both small and immense, mortal and eternal, forever future Varda. Varda's transmedia method of empathetic engagement is premised on listening. It is transformative. Zigzagging across lines of reality and fantasy, her encounters with faces, places, and things grasp relations extending from a person, family, or group to a greater world memory and awareness of the infinite duration and awareness of the infinite duration that comprises all life. Hence Varda's reverence for nature, ecology, and especially a sea, those waves, winds, and sands of time through which Varda reflects on her mortality as she develops with humility a consciousness of life that precedes and persists beyond any single life. And indeed, in Varda's eyes, ears, and heart, all human and non-human lives are equal.
En écrivant aux gens, bonjour, je suis poète, je travaille avec des objets, les objets, ça a de la mémoire, en particulier les boutons. Moi, je jouais déjà avec la boîte à boutons de ma maman, donc à partir de là, j'ai senti qu'il y avait des histoires et que c'était lié à la mer. C'est un matrimoine.
Nous sommes chez Chantal Robergeau, qui a un chat noir et 3 personnes âgées en pension.
Chantal a participé aux Journées du matrimoine en 2003. Déjà, je me souviens que tu avais amené ta boîte à boutons.
Je vais vous montrer celui-là.
là parce que c'est
un objet, c'est vrai, tout petit, mais mon Dieu, comme il est chargé de souvenirs, de culture, des tas de choses. Il fallait organiser ça cette année.
Le chat, oui.
Arrête.
C'est un coquin, ce chat.
Ah, c'est les deux boutons qui parlent aussi.
With these maternal lines, guardian devils, and layers in mind, this talk will explore an overarching idea, a female self, Varda herself, and the subjectification processes has embodied by a screen that can construct, fragment, and even dissolve a self. I will speak of Varda's works in terms of the trajectory her own life took that grew in fame with her later in life beloved, celebrated persona, and of how Varda simultaneously foresaw and foretold of her posthumous dissipation into the world. Sandy Flitterman Lewis writes of a, quote, perpetual and reverberating dialectic, a, quote, continual interchange between historical contexts and issues of the female self in society at every stage of Varda's work, end of quote. A lifelong commitment to realizing doublings has between materiality and immateriality, and the universal and personal pervades Varda's works. Self-portraiture remains at the forefront of her work, and yet crucially, her portraits extend beyond thoughts of her own subjectivity. Her art is more than reflexive. It does not refer back to a fixed position. It repeats differently. It opens, it shatters.
On voit Micha. Et on recommence avec un plâtre de celle qu'on nomma l'inconnu de la scène. Voici un trio de la série des portraits brisés.
Perceiving, being perceived, listening, touching, affecting, being affected. The processes at play are prophetic. They look forward and backward at once. Varda's art invents, challenges, learns, and listens closely. Simply, movingly, within the final moments of her final film, Varda by Agnès, Varda explains, quote, we filmed a sequence to show that the tomb is near the sea. This small cat, who was so important to our lives, took on another dimension with the tomb. Seen from further away, she was like any human, minuscule in the universe.
C'est à une chatte de famille, la chatte Gougou, que j'ai consacré un tombeau. Sur une musique de Steve Reich, l'animation a été faite à l'ancienne. On a filmé l'installation terminée avec coquillages et fleurs. Puis, on a filmé image par image en enlevant à chaque fois un élément. Ici, nous voyons la séquence projetée à l'envers. Ce jour-là, Hervé, tu m'as vu tourner. Tu étais venu avec ta fille.
Oui, elle était montée dans la nacelle.
On avait installé une grande fleur dans l'arbre parce qu'il fallait avoir un repère. Et je savais pourquoi. Et alors, quand j'étais là, je t'ai dit, est-ce que la fondation veut bien me payer 1 heure d'hélicoptère?
Bah oui, évidemment.
Et alors, on a fait un petit plan d'hélicoptère avec le repère de la fleur rouge, un mouvement pour montrer que ce tombeau est près de la mer. Et surtout, cette petite chatte qui était importante dans notre vie, on lui donnait une autre dimension avec ce tombeau. Mais, vue de plus en plus loin, elle était comme n'importe quel humain, minuscule dans l'univers.
In rhythm with the flows of the sea are Varda's memories and thoughts of far-reaching horrors.
Une baleine échouée. Elle est en colère parce que le monde va mal.
Le seuil des 1000 morts a été franchi aujourd'hui.
A beached whale, Angry at the state of the world, Varda's voiceover explains approximately 15 minutes into this 4th episode of her mini-series that focuses on her installation La Mer, etc. We might remember this montage from Varda's 2008 film, The Beaches of Agnès, at its 36-minute mark, and later in Varda by Agnès. With recurring shots of the whale across Varda's works, the camera routinely enters this hell that presages her thoughts of global horrors and suffering, the plights of countless anonymous people, drowning and drowned migrants, mutilated corpses, murdered children. With every reiteration of the montage across Varda's works, she yet expresses a reprieve, inasmuch as Varda feels sheltered from the world, sheltered from the wind inside my coastal shelter. As Varda asserts in another instance, time has passed and passes except on the beaches which are timeless. She insists that a sea and its beaches beckon toward an ethics of ecological worldly engagement as a blank slate and canvas, an empty horizon through which one might find energy and perhaps peace to recommence anew. A sea and its beach, or an island, are, as Varda repeatedly claims, a place of inspiration, a mental landscape. Through its reflective surface, a sea gives us ourselves. As blank canvases, we lose ourselves to become its pure consciousness. A beach and its sea, their surfaces embody limits or borders of things where identity breaks down and becomes other. If you opened her up, as Varda claimed, you'd find beaches. She repeatedly multiplies perceptive surfaces as her works push fixed notions of identities to their limits. Her practice exposes restrictions of gender, race, and other so-called norms and their power inclusions and exclusions as it challenges the notion of a self and urges us to listen and see further. The notion of a sea as an empty horizon gives way to the reflective blank surfaces of Pierre Soulage's black paintings.
Lorsque j'ai commencé à faire ces peintures-là, je me suis aperçu à ce moment-là que je ne travaillais pas avec du noir, que je travaillais avec de la lumière réfléchie par les états de surface du noir. Il y a des endroits où ça brille et des endroits où c'est calme. Calme ou bien rythmé, enfin, peu importe.
Qu'est-ce que c'est que ce passage du noir à l'autre noir?
Lorsque j'ai eu une grande exposition au musée d'art moderne de Paris, on avait baptisé Noir Lumière. Et Noir Lumière, je trouvais que c'était un très bon titre, mais c'est un titre qui me gênait. Alors c'est pourquoi j'ai inventé un mot pour dire au-delà du noir lumière, le mot de outre-noir. Outre-noir désignant finalement un champ mental et non pas un phénomène optique.
Mais il y a un petit peu outre-tombe, hein, quand même.
Il y a tout ce qu'il y a. Il y a outre...
Il y a outre-mer aussi.
Outre-mer, outre-Atlantique, outre-Rhin. Ça désigne un autre pays que celui du noir.
Ce triptyque a été exposé à Pompidou, mais il fait partie des toiles que Soulage garde à 7.
Je le trouve bien ici, parce qu'elle est face à la mer. Faire la lumière du jour, aux lumières qu'on a au centre Pompidou, qui sont toutes des lumières ponctuelles, où il n'y a aucun diffuseur.
Elle est face à la mer, elle est à côté de la mer.
Oui. On voit la mer dans le reflet. Aujourd'hui, elle est cette couleur-là, mais il y a d'autres jours où un jour, il y avait un orage, c'était seulement les arbres qui étaient éclairés et les devenaient verts.
Quelle émotion tu penses avoir eue qui se transmettent sans explication dans tes peintures? Pourquoi il y a des gens si émus et que ça fait pleurer? Voilà.
Non, je crois que elle les concerne. Ça leur fait... c'est un choc, c'est une rencontre.
During her interview and filming of Soulage, who faces Varda's camera in a close shot against the black of his paintings as he voices these words, Varda's unsurprising responses pertain to her foremost thoughts, of course, of survival and seas. She, who vitally embodies an energy of outre-femme, proposes the terms outre-tombe and outre-mer, a beyond of grave and sea. With these waves, seas, sands, and winds of time, Varda's later works incessantly reflect on her own aging as they reveal a growing consciousness of self within world and universe. By this way of thought, a self-portrait, a perception of oneself in time and space, offers more than a personal history and narrative. And with sustained awareness of the, quote, hundreds of thousands of people she doesn't know, Varda attains an anonymity, an imperceptibility with processes that exceed a narcissistic closed relation or one merely between herself and another. Varda's invitation to listen extends even to whispers and murmurs of time, as embodied by a sea, the only intact and most ancient thing in the world, from whence life came and to which it will return. Through its openness to the world, her art seems, in fact, a Mobius movement from the familiar to the cosmic and back, as it gleans intimate experiences through a compassionate global embrace. This perception turned outward and hence inward distinguishes Varda's searching presence in her art as a central yet modest persona. Along this line, a Varda work often bears her name in its title and inherently embodies aspects of her personal experiences, while her omnipresence celebrates a greater awareness through which she herself becomes minuscule in the universe. Particularly in her later works, Varda's now famed identity seems a matter of course, as it also gestures to a future that finally witnessed the movement her works so often foretell, that of a self's full dissolution into memory and world, and in Varda's case, the becoming imperceptible or becoming minuscule of a woman whose loving openness to life became complete on the 29th of March, 2019, in her 90th year. With sensitivity, Varda listened, and seemingly still listens, to individual voices, to vagabonds, wanderers, outcasts. Through polymorphous portraits of different people and places, whether famed or ordinary, Varda's acts of portraiture affirm life through an inherent feminism, or, to reiterate Soulage's wave of thought, an ultra-feminisme. Photographer, writer, filmmaker, collage, and installation artist, and step with her skills across these forms and championing of all whom she encountered, Varda produced a series of still, moving, and literary portraits. These expose a series of endless folds of artist, subject, and viewer, and proffer far more than simply a portrait of another, or of Varda, or of stasis or movement alone. In keeping with Varda's perception of a desire for movement linked to immobility, a fundamental component of her body of work pertains to mediating moments between stillness and movement. Varda frequently explores this elusive temporal between through the diptychs and triptychs of her installations. Comprising only static images or moving and still alike, these forms are often also covertly and rapidly inserted into the bodies of her films, as in these three screen grabs from Varda and JR's 2017 Visage Village, or Faces Places. If you look closely, you'll see how each of these shots from the film are in fact triptychs that lasted, as Chris Marker might say, a 24th of a second the length of a film frame. The effect of such seeming formalism contributes not only to the celebrated playfulness of Varda's art, with its layered series of new repetitions, but also to the somber undercurrent of all her works that derives from a humility again and an admission that reality and fantasy are interwoven elements of life. Everything is double. And so too in art, if as questioning and empathetic as Varda's. Beyond the faces seen in Varda's art, including and especially her own, are revelations of worlds and experiences that commence with and then journey beyond any one portrait. These transitory, oft fragmented portraits assume various forms. They exist in the extreme close-ups of hands, feet, napes, limbs, breasts, and torsos, in aerial views of landscapes and tombs near the sea, and across stage tableaux that renew stunning moments of art history. These chance emergences of self-portraiture in Varda arise from even a wrinkle or eyelash and are dispersed across a milieu and pass into the landscapes of her installations and films. Varda becomes imperceptible and yet remarkably corporeal as her own body features in extreme self-close-ups and her voice speaks through interviews and voiceovers. These works expose us to ourselves while always foregrounding the woman, and women behind, before, and beyond the lens. Varda's methodology for gleaning hearts among potatoes and sensuality from the quotidian seemingly derives, as she claims, from filming things we didn't understand in a quest to feel, to experience the world at large. Could anything other than the beating rhythms of hearts, as in Christian Boltanski and Chris Marker's works, or waves, as against shores, rushing in and pulling away, seem more apt for thoughts of Varda's art and her life's explorations? The entirety of these, dreamt of together, seems to suggest a grand self-portrait, marked equally by sadnesses that may wash away and joys that her art enduringly imparts. And I'm just at the end. In Faces Places, approximately 30 minutes from the film's end, the two directors face the sea amidst swirling sand and wind. In Varda by Agnès, at the end of Varda's final film, she repeats the 2017 sequence, telling us that Faces Places was to end here, where she and JR vanished into the blur. With its resurfacing in 2019, the 2017 sequence might suggest the closing of Varda's career and life. But the return to the sea and sand, to nature and to its elements, as prophetically staged by Varda, demands more. Acutely aware of the precarious balance between herself and time, she reenacts a doubling yet again of the personal and cosmic, and at last fully effects her own worlding. Staring back at the interstice between seen and unseen, Varda embraces the future.
La mer a toujours raison, et le vent, et le sable. À un moment, on avait imaginé, Pierre et moi, qu'on finirait le film comme ça, qu'on disparaîtrait dans une tempête de sable et de vent. Je crois que c'est comme cela que je vais finir cette causerie. Je disparais dans le flou. Je vous quitte.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Boljkovac, for your excellent paper.
Nadine.
So again, I'd like to invite audience members to submit questions to the chat that will be read at the end and directed to the panelists. So please do ask questions using the chat.